This video is going to cover how to write a simple sequence program, which includes input and some calculations. Before we get started, I wanted to review some of the items in the simple sequence reading. Simple sequence is one of the flow of control or flow of execution. We looked at this last week when we covered methods. In simple sequence, you just go in order. In simple sequence, you just go in order of the statements. You saw that when you had methods, that flow of execution breaks to call the method, and then when the method is done executing, returns. Two other types of flow of execution we'll be looking at in the next few weeks are decision, which is also called branching. You can take multiple paths. And repetition, which is also called looping, where you repeat a set of statements multiple times. When you do simple sequence, I want you to think of get the input, determine the processing steps, and then output the result. IPO. Here's an example. Program needs to calculate the circumference and area of a circle and then output those values. What are we going to output? Their circumference and the area. Well, what do I want the user to input? The radius. Sometimes this is the hardest part to determine. If I give you a problem, you got to determine what am I asking for you to output and what is it I'm going to ask the user to input. Then the processing steps are a way for you to get from here to here. Can I get from knowing the radius to knowing the circumference? And yes, it's in this assignment statement. Can I get from knowing the radius to knowing the area? Well, you already know about output. We've been using system.out.println for a few weeks now. Let's talk about input. In order to input, we're going to use the scanner class. The methods in the scanner class are not static. That means you will need to create an instance or an object of the scanner class in order to call the methods. In addition, the scanner class is not available in Java by default. So in order to use the scanner class, you're going to have to import it. That statement is going to go below the package declaration. Sometimes if you're creating a project, NetBeans is going to add that package declaration. So it's going to go below that, but above your class declaration. You can use either that or that. Then inside the class declaration, you're going to need an object to be able to call those methods of the scanner class. And your statement will look something like this, very cryptic. Think of this left part where I've got one marked, kind of like a variable declaration. Instead of declaring a variable, you're declaring an object variable. I just happen to name this one keyboard. What's the type? Well, the type is the class name. Instead of int, amount, or double sales tax rate, you have scanner keyboard. You could have called it anything, any valid identifier name. Scanner input, scanner in, scanner console are some common identifiers for the scanner object. Then you have an assignment statement. To the right of the assignment statement, you start with the new keyword, and the new keyword is what's creating the instance. Then the class name, followed in parentheses, any of the arguments. For now, just copy this. You don't have to call it keyboard, but everything else, just keep it just like this. Once you have this created, you can now use the methods of the scanner class. So here we have the next method, which reads and returns the next token as a string. The next double, if you're inputting into a variable, that's a double. If you're inputting into a variable, that's an int. Use next int. If you're inputting all the way until the enter key, use next line. It's a string. There are many more methods besides these, but this will get us started. So here's an example. Assuming that we've created a scanner object here, instead of calling it keyboard, that scanner object is called input, which is fine. So I have a variable, number of courses, and I'm going to use the name of the scanner object and the next int method. The user is going to key in a value, 4, let's say, and then 4 gets assigned to that variable. You can also declare the variable and call the method in the same statement. In case you're curious, what if right here the user keyed in XYZ, which is a string. It's not an integer, but we're expecting integer input. Well, if that happens, you are going to cause the computer to crash. You will cause that fatal runtime error because you have bad input. It's called an exception. So we don't know how to code yet so that those exceptions don't happen with bad input. A good coder is going to write their code that regardless of the input, the program won't crash. For now, we're not there yet. So our assumption is going to be that the input is valid. But here I've written a program and I input and I ran it. So here I've declared the variable. Up here's where I'm importing the java.util so that I can have the scanner object. Created the scanner object. I called it input here. And I used the next int method to get the input into the number of courses. And I was going to output it then. Very simple program. Not doing any calculations in here. And notice I entered XXYY. And as soon as I entered that and hit the enter key, because the enter key ends the token, I get this error message because that's a string and that's not valid. The whole build failed when that happened. One other thing I noticed is when I executed this, all I saw was run, which is okay since I'm testing the program. I know what it was expecting. Let's take a look at this program, which does include a prompt, creating our integer variable. And here's the prompt. Enter the number of courses. I want you to see that I just used the print. The input can go on the same line as the prompt. Here we're creating the instance of the scanner object. Here's the next int. I did enter an integer this time. And here's the output. So that prompt and the formatting of the output does improve the program. Let's go ahead and create this program that calculates the area and the circumference of a circle in Java. I was looking at my planning note thinking, how am I going to apply this to Java? So when I see an input, that kind of gave me a clue that I need to make sure I import the scanner, get the radius. I thought through what variables I'm going to need. And I also thought what data type I want to make them. I looked over here and I thought, I'm going to use the math.py constant from the math static class that's in java.lang package. And here's the pseudocode. Now, pseudocode is fake code. It's something you can do to help you make sure you got all your steps in order, and it's just a planning thing that may end up saving you some time. Generally, when you do a simple sequence, you want to make sure you declare all your variables first. You want to get your input next. Then you want to do your calculations, which I call processing steps. After that, after the processing is all done, then you can output. I'm going to go ahead right here and import my Java util package. And then inside the main, I'm going to declare my variables. What variables do I need? A variable for the scanner object. So let's go ahead and do that. Scanner input equals new scanner system dot in. I will also need some doubles. I'll need a double to hold the radius. I'll need a double to hold the circumference. And I'll need a double to hold the area. So that's done. The next thing we want to do is to get the input. But recall that prior to getting the input, you should prompt the user for the variable or the value you expect them to input. So I'm actually going to begin my input section with system.out.println and prompt them to enter the radius After the user has entered the radius, then I can use the scanner object to input into the radius. So I'm going to assign to the radius. The scanner object is called input. The method's called next double. That's all. That's the only thing we needed to input. So now let's do our processing steps. And our processing steps will include some calculations. So we're going to calculate the circumference. And that's equal to pi r squared. But I would like you to use the math pi. Notice that that came up in the drop-down for me. Math is one of those classes that, first of all, is static, so you don't have to create an instance of the math class like you do the scanner class. And secondly, java.lang is the package that it is in, and java.lang is automatically included in all your Java programming, so we didn't have to import anything to be able to use the math class. This is referenced in some of our reading this week. So we got pi, let's see, to calculate, we need 2 pi r. Let me come over here. So it's 2 times pi times our radius. And our area is pi r squared. So again, I'm going to use the math.pi. Got to make sure I use the capital P's there. And r squared could be simply radius times radius. Since we're using the math class, in your lab, you did math.pal at the end of the lab. And math.pal is how you could do exponentiation. So I'm going to go ahead and use that math.pal. It's prompting for area. I think it's prompting for area because we haven't used it yet. R squared, so that's radius and squared. Can you read that? Radius squared. That's how that method works. So I've got my processing done, and now I have to output. So do label your output. I'm going to use the system.out.printf, and I'll label this as circumference and put a semicolon there, and then I'm going to put a %f and a %n for new line, and the arcs is simply the circumference. Repeat that again, something very similar, except we're using the area instead. So we have our variables, our input, our process, our output. Let's see if we can run this. It's prompting me for the radius, and I get output circumference and area. Would you know how to format this using printf so that only 2 decimal places are printed instead of, looks like 6? Let's do that. So right before the %f, I'm going to put %.2. F, %.2, F. And then the new line, and let's run that again. And there is our simple sequence program.